Welcome back. As UN Ambassador and National Security Advisor, Susan Rice has taken on any number of tough fights on the global stage. But now she's turning her attention to challenges right here at home as director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. And she joined us to discuss the long list of pressing issues facing the Biden administration and began with where things stand when it comes to racial justice, even beyond policing.
There's a great deal that's begun to change because President Biden has made it clear from his very first day in office that he is committed to racial justice and equity. He named it as one of the four major crises, along with COVID, the economy, and climate, that his administration and our nation has to tackle. And that's why from his very first day in office, he signed a whole-of-government executive order to make it clear that we will work to advance all forms of equity and justice throughout the federal government. The legislation that he has put forward, starting with the American Rescue Plan, has embedded equity and justice at the center of it. It will reduce African-American poverty by 34% this year. It will reduce overall child poverty in this country by 50%. And it will tend to communities of different respects that have not benefited fully from the fruits of our society. So when we talk about equity, Mika, we talk very much about racial equity, but also other forms of equity, concern for our disabled community, veterans who have not benefited fully despite their extraordinary sacrifices. Rural America, which has been underinvested in and too often left behind. So this is a broad approach. And when it comes to issues of race, whether it's the economy, whether it's health care, and making sure that, for example, COVID vaccines are distributed equitably and reach communities that have often been left behind in our health system, whether it's education and historic investments that the president has proposed in our nation's historically black colleges and universities, our other minority-serving institutions. This is a broad-based, comprehensive approach. And we will, of course, talk about criminal justice and policing. The president has been very clear and forceful in his call for the Senate to pick up and embrace the House-passed version of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which he strongly supports because it will make an important dent in the very urgent challenge of police reform.
Ambassador Rice, I was just going to ask you, how important is it that Congress passes legislation, that it moves on what the House has done, whether there's a bipartisan approach or whether the Democrats go it alone? How important is the passage of that legislation?
Well, Joe, it's very important legislation. It's not a cure-all, let's be realistic, but it's a very important step. And the House-passed version was robust. Obviously, in the Senate, there needs to be bipartisan compromise. We need 60 votes, which is why we're encouraged to see Senator Cory Booker and Senator Tim Scott, Congresswoman Karen Bass, and others negotiating seriously and in good faith to see if we can get a meaningful police reform bill out of the Senate that will move the ball forward as far as we possibly can.
From your different perspectives and the different jobs that you've had in the past in administrations, for this job, Susan, what are you personally focused on? What would you like to see accomplished maybe in the first year of your work with this administration?
Well, Mika, I'm on the overall team that is trying to ensure that we are building back this country better. We played the Domestic Policy Council played a very important role in crafting and implementing the American Rescue Plan, which has put shots in Americans' arms and checks in their pockets. We are instrumental in the work on the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, which will make vitally needed transformational investments in our workers, in our young people and our children and families, making sure that we're able to compete in the 21st century in cutting-edge technologies, as well as dealing with the critical challenges we face, like the climate crisis, while creating millions of new high-paying union jobs. So we're very much focused on that. That is my principal effort as well, as we work on racial justice and in criminal justice reform, as we deal with our broken immigration system, as we work on education, K through 12, getting all of our kids back in school, building up our higher education system and ensuring that it remains the most cutting edge and competitive in the world. All of these are issues that fall within the work of the Domestic Policy Council. Health care. One thing, Mika, that I want to point out is we have been making enormous progress on expanding access to affordable health care through a special enrollment period that opened in February and will close in August. Over 1.1 million Americans have newly signed up for health care under the Affordable Care Act. And when we passed the American Rescue Plan, we substantially reduced the costs of health care that you can purchase on healthcare.gov, so that now an average person will save $50 per person per month when they sign up, and 4 out of 5 families will have their costs, be very, very de minimis. So this is a big deal. It brings health care to Americans who need it most and makes health care for all who have signed up far more affordable. So those are among the issues that are top of my plate and foremost on our agenda.
On Friday, I think I saw on Twitter, you roundly condemned, strongly condemned the anti-Semitic attacks that are going on around the country. But for those that didn't see that, what would you say about the anti-Semitic attacks that, unfortunately, we've seen from Los Angeles all the way back to New York?
Well, Joe, these are horrific. They're despicable. We have to condemn them in the strongest possible terms. We cannot tolerate hate against any community. Anti-Semitism has a long and brutal history in our country and around the world. We have to fight it. We have to stand up and say there is no safe harbor for hate. And there's no safe harbor for hate against anybody, which is why last week the president proudly signed the COVID-19 hate crimes legislation, which passed Congress on a broad bipartisan basis. It was particularly inspired by the horrific attacks that we've seen against Asian Americans in this country over the last year, but it also included very important provisions to deal with other forms of hate crimes, including anti-Semitism and racist hate crimes. And we have to be one on this, Joe. We can't accept violence or attacks or bigotry against any segment of American society. And what we have witnessed in the last few weeks with respect to anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish attacks is something we cannot tolerate, and we have to combat with everything we have.
Our thanks to Susan Rice for that conversation.